My name is Amy Sperling. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Compt. We're a perk management software that allows companies to fully customize flexible benefits for their employees so that every single person can get something that they want and need rather than a company trying to read employees' minds and figure out what employees need for them. We're going to go today, we're going to go through cash runway and budgeting and how that works. My background is that I'm a former CFO. I've been a CFO 3 times. So, I've been part of 6 different companies prior to starting my own company. And cash was always a concern in every single one of them. I've been part of raising over 15 rounds of capital, and this is always part of that key calculation. How much do you raise and when is frequently driven by how much cash you have access to. So we're going to go through a very functional workshop this morning. I'm going to take you through a little bit about why this is important, kind of the high level, and then we're going to go through in a little bit more detail how to actually build your own model and do some of that together as well. Please do send me questions in the Slido link. I'm going to try and go back and forth between the presentation mode and looking for questions. So there may be a couple of pauses here and there, but this is meant to be interactive and to help you. There is no one financial model template, so we're going to, you could very well have questions. Let's get into it. Let me share my screen here and we'll get started. All right. So budgeting for your startup, looking at how you determine your company's cash runway. That's what we're going to go through today. There we go. So when you're thinking about, there's a lot of things we have to figure out in starting a company. There's product ideas, there's how you want to design your team, there's infinite possibilities. That's the beauty of innovation, right? The one thing that is finite is how much cash you have in the bank. And that is something that we're going to talk about a lot today. It's the one piece that, if you run out of cash and you don't have any other sources, makes it, unless you're somehow independently wealthy, which I know many of us are not, that's the deciding moment of, can we keep this going or do we stop? So that's the one finite thing. That number in a bank account is something that I'm constantly focused on to make sure that we've got enough to get where we need to go. So that's why we're going to spend so much time on this morning. So the quick and dirty. So the too long didn't read version. If you want, I'm hoping people don't leave, but this is the calculation that you basically need to figure out your cash runway. How much cash do you have in the bank account? What are you spending every single month? Divide it, and that's how many months of cash you have. That's the easy version, right? There's not a lot of nuance to it. It's very basic arithmetic. That's going to tell you how much cash is in the bank right now. Now, there's obviously a lot of nuance that goes into if you have additional revenue coming month over month, if your expenses are changing. But if you're looking for the quick and dirty version of this, that's what this looks like. So for everyone who's like, good, I've got it, well, on to your next session, you're done. For everyone else, let's talk about budgeting a little bit and talk about how that works and how this flows into your cash flow projections. So there's a lot of reasons why a good budget is really critical. I started doing a budget for Compt day one. It's when you think about projections and budgets, you need to understand, do you have a viable business model? When you're looking at something and saying, hey, well, that's a great idea. I'll use my friend as an example. She was thinking she wanted to do an ice cream. No, I take it back, a hot chocolate truck. So like a food truck, but for hot chocolate. She was like, I think that'd be really cool. And she came at it from an artist perspective. She could have all different flavors of hot chocolate. It'd be really amazing. And I was like, okay, that's, that I like hot chocolate. That'd be fantastic. But let's look at the numbers and see if that's actually a business model or a viable business. And then you start running the numbers around, okay, what's it going to cost for the truck? How much can you charge per cup of hot chocolate? How often do you think people actually want hot chocolate in the summer in Boston? And you start running the numbers and you're like, you're never going to pay for that truck. It's not a viable business option. And so I start with the numbers because that's the way my brain works around, you've got a great idea, but can you build a business model off of this? Is there a path? And there's a lot of different paths, but is there a path that you could take that's going to make it to where this is viable, is going to start generating revenue and start generating more than you're putting into it? Investors want to see that too. If they're going to give you money, they're going to want to know that you have a thought process in place here that's not just the artist version of, hey, I want to build this amazing thing or this really cool tech tool or whatever it is. It's, all right, what are you going to do with that? How are you going to turn that into something that's going to generate profits or at least money? It may not be profitable for a while, but how are you going to generate revenue? That's the way, the more data you can have, the easier it is to make decisions, I find. Again, that's the way my brain works, because you can start seeing patterns. And when you can see patterns, that allows you to start deciding, okay, this is changing for the better, this is changing for the worse. How do we adjust for that? But you got to start somewhere, and that's starting with a budget and a projection. So the way this works functionally is, you look at all the money you plan on making, all the revenue over months, all the money you think you're going to spend, and you subtract it. And then that gives you what's left over. And a lot of times that's negative, right? A lot of us are in tech startups. You're not generating, you're not profitable for a long time. My father owned a bike shop for years, which was a profitable business. You sell a finite good, you get enough cash to pay your bills. And so he frequently asks me, hey, is your company profitable yet? Like, it's a SaaS business model. Like, I don't even think HubSpot's profitable yet. That's just not the way this business model works. Doesn't mean it's not a viable business, but profitability isn't necessarily what is driving us when you're looking at a technology company. But it's, how much do you have to reinvest? Where are you reinvesting? Are you spending in it too much in advance of the money that you're bringing in? And if you are, then can you raise money for that? So we're going to get into a couple of different financial models. I'm going to take you through a revenue model, so the top end of your profit and loss statement, and how you might think about creating something along those lines. And I'm going to take you through the expense model too. We're probably going to start with the expense side, actually, because a lot of us, again, may be pre-revenue. And so thinking through how much money you're going to need is important. Now, when we talk about these modeling scenarios, there's a few things to keep in mind. For one, there is no standard template. I get asked all this time, what do you have a template I could use to build out my budget, to build out my model? Every single company I've joined, I've had to build from scratch. There is no one template. There's what goes into a profit and loss, but that's not the same as a financial model, because you need to know, okay, if I sell this many of this thing at this price, how much revenue is that going to generate? That's not a profit and loss. That's a financial model. And so you have to figure out what those triggers and those key drivers are for your business. You're gonna want to build in, there's lots of detail that you can add in to your financial model. And then there's the shortcut version, which I'll also show you as well. You don't need lots of detail when you're building out one of these models. There's also this is really complicated math. And I see this frequently with folks that are not, don't have a finance background. We're talking about very basic arithmetic here. It's mostly adding, subtracting, dividing, and multiplying. You don't have a lot of complicated higher level math that needs to go into building a financial model, especially at the early stages. I've gone into companies to help them with their modeling and found these super complicated kind of versions in multi-tab spreadsheets where it's like, okay, if we have this rep sell this many, can sell this much revenue per year, and that needs this many leads, and it generates, and it's a beautiful model, but they're so early stage that every single month you're changing the number because you have no idea what one rep can possibly generate, because there's industry standards, but you're not at industry standard level. So you need to kind of take it back a few notches and do it a little bit kind of back of the envelope for a while. And then there's the myth that everyone else knows what they're talking about. I can't tell you how many times I have worked with companies where people do sound like they know what they're talking about. They sound like they know how to build their model. They use a lot of terms that make it sound like they know exactly what they're doing and they're on top of things. And the thing is that most people don't. So don't be intimidated by that. A lot of this is figuring it out along the way, and it doesn't need to be that complicated. So I'm going to show you a little bit of that, the easier version of that. All right, before we get to the terms, I just want to check real quick, make sure we don't have any questions coming in. 1 second here. And apologize for the pauses, but I want to make sure that everybody's, okay, I do have one question. I understand there's no standard template on financial model, but what are the key components of that all models must have? Great question. We're going to actually go through that right now. Thanks for teeing up the next section of the presentation. I appreciate that. All right, sharing my screen again. We're going to get back into it. All right. Here are some of the terms that you're going to hear, or you will hear as people talk about financial models. So they may refer to it as a financial model, an operating model, there's metrics, there's profit and loss. There's a lot of different terms. Each one really does have a different meaning. There is nuance between them. A financial model is more around, it's not necessarily a budget. It's more about projections, where you're going to go in the future, and how, if you bring in this much revenue, how many people can you hire? And it's thinking about that. An operating model is how you're operating your business. This is closer to a budget. So it's more backwards looking than forwards looking. Metrics are the things that you're looking at that may not be profit and loss related. So things like daily average users, monthly average users, if you're looking at your CAC, if you're looking at all kinds of different, these little SaaS metric terms that are down here on the page, those are all metrics. So there's different things that people are using, and they use them interchangeably. So you'll hear a lot of different terms around that. What we're going to talk about today is an operating model, and we're going to show you a little bit on the top end of a financial model as well. But again, the whole point here is, where's your business going? How do those numbers kind of come together, and what does that output look like, so you've got enough cash to get where you need to go? Revenue, sales, and MRR. This is, these terms are used interchangeably. From an accounting perspective, they mean very different things. For the general kind of public, as they're talking about it, they are used interchangeably though. So you don't have to try and parse out what someone is necessarily saying, unless you're talking to an accountant. Revenue is very GAAP, accounting related. Sales is how much you're actually selling, and relates to revenue. MRR, monthly recurring revenue, is much more of a SaaS metric than it is relating to your P&L. But again, people use them interchangeably. And so just so that you know what some of these terms are that you'll hear. Cost of goods sold and expenses. So the way a profit and loss is set up, so one of the key kind of financial temperature checks for your business is you've got, your revenue or your sales. You've got your cost of goods sold. How much did it cost you to sell that revenue? And that's usually things like hosting costs, could be marketing costs, AWS costs, things like that go in there. Or if you have a physical good, it'd be the actual inventory to sell for that. And then your expenses. So your salaries, your travel, if we ever get to travel again, your internal use software, things like that fall into your expenses. So those are the three big buckets. Other terms you'll hear, and you'll see in my model as well, is FTE. So full-time equivalent, that means a person. How many full-time employees do you have? But a lot of times that gets shortened to FTE. Benefit load factor. So it's not just somebody's salary you've got to take into consideration. It's the fact that you also have to pay payroll taxes. And if you offer health insurance and are subsidizing it, you also have to take that into account. So a benefit load factor is if you take somebody's salary, what percentage on top of that do you need to account for? Because that's what it's going to cost you. If you're only paying taxes, it's usually about 9%. If you're paying taxes and some portion of their health insurance, a lot of times I see it in the 13 to 15% range. Is pretty typical, but specifics down to an individual company end up being what you end up paying, but those are very, very typical ranges that I would expect to see. We talked about the P&L, the profit and loss, the balance sheet, the cash flows. These are the three different instruments that a company's or an investor's gonna evaluate you on from a financial perspective to look at how healthy is your business? The three give the complete financial picture of your business. And we're going to talk about the cash flow in particular today, because we're figuring out how to budget for cash flows and how much cash runway you have. Cash versus accrual-based accounting. That's where, are you accounting for things based on when you spend the money? So you spend for an annual license for software. So say you're paying for Zendesk all up front for the year. It's on a cash basis, that big drop happens all at one time. If you're on an accrual basis, you split it out over 12 months. So it depends on, what setting you have in QuickBooks, basically, how that'll flow into your numbers. And then there's a lot of different metrics that you could hear or that could go into your model. And it depends on your business model. If you're selling a physical good, you're not going to have SaaS metrics. If you are a SaaS business model, you're going to hear these metrics. If you're a consumer business model, you're going to hear a few, the DAU, the MAU conversion rates, things like that. All right. Again, I'm going to pause for a second here. Make sure I'm not leaving anybody behind, and we get questions answered. Again, apologies, jumping back and forth. It's the beauty of virtual conference. We're multitasking here. All right. So considerations for your model. When you're thinking about your model, you want to think about your revenue side. So what are your revenue drivers? What moves that needle? What helps you get more revenue? Is it number of users that sign up? Is it number of physical products you sell? Is it, do they come in and buy once and then they're gone? It could be whether it's software or it's a physical good. Is it something where they keep buying every single month? What are those key drivers for your revenue model? Because you're going to need to understand those to be able to model it out. How will you price your product? So again, is that they pay all at once, all at one time, or do they pay on an ongoing basis? How does that work? And what does that look like for you? What marketing spend are you going to need to have to achieve your sales? And a lot of this, you're going to have to guess. When you're early stages, you don't know. It's impossible to know exactly how much money you're going to need to spend to get a particular user when you're trying to get your first user. So, but you got to put a stake in the ground and guess. And then as you get more data, you refine your numbers and you adjust them. But how much money do you think you're going to need to spend to get that user to sell that good? How long do you think your sales cycles are going to be? How long is it going to take you to sell, again, adding another user or selling a good? How long do you think that's going to take you? And again, you're making guesses with all of this. Educated guesses, hopefully, but you're making guesses. And then as you get more data, you change your model and you keep refining it. That's why I always start with the quick and dirty version of the model. That is pretty simplistic. And then as I get more data, it gets more complicated, over the course of years, because then you have actual data to build into this model to where it can actually predict things for you. And then are you targeting the SMB, the mid-market, enterprise? What side of the market are you targeting? If you're targeting large enterprises, your sales cycle is going to be longer, your price tag is going to be bigger. You've got a little different approach than if you're targeting the SMB, so small to medium-sized businesses, where your price can be less, your sales cycle could be much shorter. If you're targeting consumers, that could be an even different cycle. But things that you need to consider. So these are things that you need to consider for your model, because it's what is creating this revenue number that you're going to be putting in your model. What drives that? So that's one of those things that everybody needs to have in their model. On the expense side, same idea. What drives your expenses? I can tell you that for most technology startups, pretty much all of them, 85 to 95% of your costs are going to be your people. That's the big ticket item in most businesses. Even in services businesses, this could be incredibly high. When you start getting into a physical good, a consumer good, you start having inventory and the physical good that you're having to pay for before you can sell it, which will take up a portion of that, like a larger portion of your expenses. But for the most part, the vast majority of your expenses is going to be your people. For us at Compt, I'd say it's about 90% of our costs are our people. You've got about 5 to 7% is internal use software, so paying for things like Zendesk or Slack or Google. And then you've got a little, 3 to 4% that is other stuff. But the big ticket item is our people right now. It used to be that rent was a bigger ticket item for a lot of companies. When you're early stage now, and if you're just able to get out of your lease, that's obviously much smaller. But that's the way to I think about my expenses. And you'll see how we think about building that out in the model. So think about who is on your team now and who you want to hire. So you start out with yourself and a co-founder or a couple of co-founders. What are the skills that you need to add to the team? And thinking about, all right, if you're, 3 people and you've got a salesperson, a marketer, and an engineer, what's the next hire you need? Do you need to add another engineer? Do you need to add a couple of engineers? Are you going to add a salesperson? Do you need to add somebody for on product? And think about timing for that as well, because what we're going to do is we're going to build out this forecast as to when you think you're going to be hiring folks, because then you can start forecasting out your costs. You need to think about how you're going to pay people. The idea, you might be able to get some friends to work for free for a little while, as co-founders, especially in the early days, maybe. But the reality is that people can't pay rent with nothing. So unless folks are independently wealthy or have parents that are footing a bill for rent and things like that, you're probably going to have to pay folks for their time. If you're doing that, then it's how do you think about that? The idea that you could pay somebody 30 grand, when they could go get a job that's 150,000 is unlikely. And so you need to think about how you think about how you're going to plan on paying folks salaries, because the reality is that even early stage companies are paying our version of market. So our salaries, we pay market salaries at Compt. Now, market doesn't mean that I pay Amazon prices. That is not my market. That's not my comparable when I'm looking at salaries. But I am looking at other early stage companies and saying, all right, if we have an engineer that is just out of school, that is just getting going, they're somewhere in the 85 to 90K range. Because if they leave Compt, they're going to go to get another job at another early stage startup, and that's probably what they're going to get paid. So it's calibrating that and keeping that in mind, because if you're only going to pay them 30 and they can go to another similar stage company and make 90, it's going to be a hard thing to sell to team members. Thinking about whether you're going to be located in an office or whether you're going to design your company be fully remote. Anybody starting right now, I'm sure, is starting fully remote. We had started as deliberately not fully remote at Compt. I didn't want to build a fully remote company because you need to design for that. So we were partially remote, and now we're fully remote, and we're having to redesign the way we communicate, the way we interact. But you need to design for that so that you can run an efficient business where everyone does feel connected, where they do feel like they're part of the same team. And then, the type of overall, what types of office software, internal use software do you need? Do you need GitHub and Slack and Zendesk? And what are you going to use for the free version for a while? HubSpot. What are you going to end up having to pay for? What's that going to cost? That ends up being, the next biggest chunk of what we spend money on at Compt. And for a lot of companies, that ends up being after employees. It ends up being what tools you're using, the things that you need to consider as you're looking at the expense side of your model. So lastly, I'm going to pause after this, and then we're going to jump into one of the models and start building, or take you through how you would want to build that. Is think about a model as layers of an onion. So I start with just a tab, and we're going to go through this and start building out, all right, what needs to be on this tab, whether it's the team tab or the internal use software tab. And then you just start layering up. So rather than starting from the top and trying to build all these formulas, start with the little pieces and make it easy on yourself. I don't believe in overcomplicated models. It's a philosophical difference that I have with some other folks in finance. If you have a really complicated model at an early stage, it's not going to predict anything any better because you don't have enough variables to know the answer. So start simple. And then as you know more, add more. It's going to be easier for you to build, and it's also going to be a lot easier for you to adjust in the future. And then know that, I change our model at least once a month at Compt because we're learning so much, both on what the actual spend is going to be in different areas, but also on our revenue projections. This is just your first version. You're going to keep iterating. There is no build it and you're done. And so just give yourself a break. It's going to be, it's just the first version of, potentially hundreds as you keep going. And then as you look at these models, I'm going to show you, blue means you can touch it. If it's not in blue, it's a formula, don't touch it. That's how you break models, is when you start typing things in, hard coding numbers into places where there's formulas. That's how you really make a mess of your model. And so I'm going to switch over now. Let me just check and make sure. Let's see here. Double checking for questions really quickly, and then we'll jump into the model. Oh boy, we've got a bunch. So I'm going to ask a couple of these, and we can, and then we'll dive into the model for a couple minutes. I've noticed organizations using sales booking numbers along with revenue numbers for budget. Can you share the difference in approach? Sales booking numbers, I don't typically use. You can certainly reference them. So a sales booking number is, the classic example is you get to the end of the year and a salesperson sells a whole bunch of deals. Let's say they sell $10,000 worth of deals, but you can't recognize them in revenue in 2020 because the contracts don't really start until January. So they're basically saying, hey, we've sold a whole bunch of stuff. It's not reflected on our P&L, but we've got this amount that we know is going to come in the future. That's where financial modeling can help you project out what that looks like. And show you where your sales numbers are going. So it gives you kind of that money in the bank. It is very different from revenue, because revenue is literally like what has happened, what can you recognize from a purely accounting perspective. And so you can, it's a great number to share. You just don't put it on your P&L. But that's a great question. Let's see here. So for pre-revenue business-to-business software platform company in healthcare, how should I rationally generate projected cash flow? There is no historic data. I hear you on this. Like, this is the day one cash flow projection. I assume worst case scenario is what I usually assume, which is no revenue. And I'd start looking at, all right, how much cash do I have in the bank? And how much am I comfortable spending over a period of time to get to a place where we are generating revenue? So assuming that you're going to get to be $100 million company year one, if you start spending money against that and hiring a team of 100 people, you're going to run out of cash really fast. So it's building in those triggers of like, okay, I'm going to make up a number here, but we've got $100,000 in the bank. We can afford to hire a couple of people. Our burn is $20,000 a month. So we've got 5 months of cash. All right, that's a little, it's not a great time period, but it's a start. What do you need to do to be able to get to that next milestone so that you can get more cash in the bank, probably through raising, your next angel checks, and go from there. But it's doing it in smaller chunks when you don't have that cash flow. You'll see in the financial model, you can project gigantic numbers and project that out. But that's not how you project your spend. That's why I keep them actually completely separate, because there's one that is more aspirational and directional, and there's the one that is closer to reality to make sure that you can keep your business running. But that's a great question. Another question, what do investors expect from this cash flow forecast for a pre-revenue startup? They want to see how you're going to spend the money. So the cash is not going to be coming from revenue when you're early stages. It's going to come from them, because they're going to be giving you cash to run your business. So they're the side of the business that's, they want to make sure that you're building a solid business here. So they want to make sure that you're not spending too much. If you raise $1 million round, they want to know that you're not going to hire 50 people because you're going to go through $1 million in a few months. They want to know that you're thinking about those calculations and thinking about like, all right, if I have 0 in revenue, because you don't have any historicals on that. What is my cash out date? How am I going to be cost conscious to make sure that we can get to that next milestone to where we are generating revenue, and then you are generating enough to warrant your next round of funding from there. So it's thinking through how that looks. So it's more the thought process and the exercise they want to see of, are you being prudent and frugal enough to be able to build a cash efficient model and be able to kind of forecast that out in a way that makes sense to where you're expecting, 12 to 18 months usage of the cash that they're giving you for a seed round. If it's an angel round, it can be rolling, as they give you $25,000 checks, how much time does that buy you? And you just keep raising. That's a great question. Let's see here. Are investors looking for how much the founders understand their financial needs versus what pre-rev founders are asking for from an investment? It's a combination of both. So they want to know that you've thought through the model, kind of like I was just talking through, and what it's going to take to build this, and versus how much money that you're going to raise. I frequently get asked by investors like, all right, how much money do you think you're going to raise to get to some sort of an event or the opportunity for an event at Compton? An event is an exit, an IPO, whatever that's going to look like. And, is this a company where they're going to need me to raise $100 million? Or is this a company where we only need to raise $5 to $10 million to get to an opportunity for one of those events? They want to think through that, because if it's, hey, this company is really interesting, but it's going to need to take $500 million to really get it to be this, amazing company, that's a lot riskier for an angel investor than a company that only needs to raise $5 or $10 million down the road. So they're looking at that balance, and they're looking about how you think about it as well. It's a great question. All right. I'm going to switch screens again. Thank you for adding questions. This is great. I'm going to take you over into the model. We're going to start with the expense side, and I'm going to take you through that first, because a lot of us don't, a lot of companies don't have revenue, and so I'll show you what that looks like. But the expense side is a little bit, it's not formulaic, but the tabs at least are consistent across companies, and can help you with that. So now what you can see on my screen here, we've got a lot of tabs. And this again goes back to that layers of the onion piece of how you build this. And kind of taking one little chunk at a time. This makes it easier to build and a lot easier for you to think through what needs to be included. And again, blue means you can touch it. Once you build your formulas, you only touch the blue section. So this is internal use software. This is what type of software do you need to be able to get your company running? What are you spending on a monthly basis? A lot of these names over here probably are things that you're spending on in your own company. So whether it's Atlassian, using it for a wiki, AWS, GitHub, Unstack for your website, Zendesk. There's a lot of different types of software you could use. I keep a running list of this. One, it helps me audit what the team is spending on, so that we make sure that we aren't spending on things that we don't need, and we cancel those services that we don't need. And then the other is so that we haven't make sure we're not doubling up. We don't have two pieces of software doing the same thing. And I project this out. And you can see, for this version, and I use some dummy data here for some of this, we're spending about $1,000 a month at the beginning of January. Now, versus a burn that you'll see, a cash burn, that was closer to 50,000. So as a percentage of what you're spending, I don't spend a ton of time on this tab because it's a small piece of it, but it's still something I want to understand as a business. So you just create a list of all the software that you're using. I've got one credit card that's in my name, where we put all that software on that credit card, and I pay that credit card every month. So that makes it really easy to keep track of things so that it's not sitting on a bunch of people's credit cards. It's a personal credit card for me, so this isn't that there's a company card, but the business actually pays the credit card bill so that it manages it as if it's a company credit card, but keeping track of that. So building out something like this, you add the name. I like to know what type of software it is so that I know what the heck this is when I'm looking at Quizzer, what is that? Okay, it's a marketing analytics software. I'll put in a little description because again, I'm not using all of this software every day. Different folks on my team are. And then the amount that it's being paid. The formula is pretty straightforward. I don't assume any increase over time. You can see that, I'm not assuming, this goes out a couple of years. I'm not assuming that their prices go up. It's a very basic model. The formula is literally like equals that thing, and you freeze it and you run it out. And then if you change it, if they did change their rates, I could change it, if this is 45 now, it's going to change it in the out months. And you'll see where that's fine because the out months are what's going to flow into my future forecast. So making it easy on yourself to be able to make those changes. The team tab is where I spend a fair amount of time because again, this is 90+% of our costs at Compt. So I put in titles. I do it based on titles rather than names because people come and go. I put them in categories. I put what their annual salary is. So the base salary I'd be giving them. I've got a few little things here so that I can figure out, all right, what is the just months per year, because I try not to write any code or any formulas that have any hard-coded numbers. So you're never typing in a number, because as soon as you do that, trying to find that one formula where you've got a number typed in can make your life a little miserable. And then I use a 10% load factor. So it's payroll taxes plus a little bit extra just to stay on the safe side. So you can see here in the compensation, it's got that 10% load factor. So for a VP of sales, if I'm paying them 100K base, that 10% makes it 110,000. That didn't assume any variable compensation. You could certainly add that in as well. And you can see where that adds in on some of the sales reps if I was to hire them. But I put in what I think I'm going to be paying for different roles for people. This is not who's on my team. My team is not this big. This is a lot of future hires. It's thinking through like, what types of people do we think we're going to have? What do I think I'm going to need to pay for them? And then what month are we going to hire them? So this is where I build out. So this is months. So this is month 30 of this model. And I just add numbers up here so that I can write formulas that say, okay, if I'm going to add this person, let's see here. So this person was added, and started getting paid in month 33. If this was going to be in month 35, it would adjust it to where they don't show up until month 35, because you're constantly, no matter when you want to hire somebody, it's going to take some time to find the right person. You're going to need to be able to adjust that and add them in. And the actual formula itself, says that, let me just highlight it here. So it says, let's see here, where's my little formula guy? All right, so if the person is hired in that month, then you take their salary and divide it by 12. And if they're not, then what does that look like? And then you take it out to the future months. So it adds, it's an if-then statement, and there's lots of stuff online about how you write those. But at the core, just thinking about it, let me take the formula off the screen because it's a scary looking formula, is if this thing over here happens, then, if I've hired this person, put this amount in this cell. And if I haven't hired them yet, put a 0. That's basically what the formula is telling you to do. And it's a pretty straightforward application once you do it. But that's what it's saying. And the formula itself in Excel or in Google Sheets will talk you through what needs to go in each section. But this is, again, where I spend my time because it's, moving people in and out. This is the biggest driver in our costs. And I look at, all right, what does that look like on a monthly basis that we're spending? And what does that look like on an annual basis? So I have a sanity check of, all right, 33,000. All right, so that's, a hefty burn. But if I've only got $100,000 in the bank, I need to be mindful of that, because that's going to go really quickly. And thinking through like, okay, when do I need to make sure that I raise more money? All of this fits into your cash flow budgeting when you're looking at how many people do I have and what does that look like? I also look at it, how many people are in each function? You want to make sure that you don't have, 5 people sitting in G&A and no one sitting in engineering if you're a tech company. Are you hiring for the right roles? Does the mix look like it makes sense for your business versus just being like, oh yeah, that person will come on, they're really smart, we'll figure out something for them. You're burning through cash flow and they may not be sitting in the right bucket. So being mindful of how you're breaking that up. I'm gonna stop sharing here for a second again and shift over to questions. Just make sure. Let's see here. Great question. How much worker compensation I need to add into the base salary? How much needs to be added in for that? That all factors into that 9%. So when you look at workers' compensation, payroll taxes, Social Security, all of that factors into that 9 to 10%. That's going to cover what you need to factor in for that. So that's kind of like industry standard number that lets you get pretty close to accurate on that. But great question. Let's see here. All right. Going back to the model. Let's see here. I have some in the Slack chat or the Zoom chat as well. So asking this question. As a general rule, do you keep 6 months of cash as runway or more, ideally? That's a great question. 6 months of cash feels like an eternity to me, which is fantastic. I love to have 6 months of cash. Realistically, the first 2 years at Compt, we never had more than 3 months. Like that's just not the way. When you're raising angel funds, you're living angel check to angel check. And so I was very clear with the team out of the gate. They always knew exactly how much money was in the bank account. But I tried to make sure I had at least 3 months. I was constantly raising that entire time because you need to keep having enough to keep driving where we need to go. And I kept the team really small so that we knew that we could maximize how much there was. Honestly, 6 months is a long time. It's a phenomenal amount of time if you can keep that in the bank. But once you raise, so say a seed round or a pre-seed round, so when you're getting to $1 million or more that you're raising at one time, then you're looking at 12 to 18 months, and you start thinking about your raise and start planning for it. A few months out, I try and raise, when I've got I want to close the money when I've got at least 2 months left of cash. Now that's dream world. Reality world is that I've closed many rounds when you had weeks of cash in the bank account. So it gets right down to the end a lot of times. If you start earlier, the risk is that you haven't hit the metrics that you need to hit to be able to get that next round. So if you close $1 million, for instance, and they say, great, you're, got a little bit of revenue, not much. We want you to get to $1 million in ARR, and I'm using SaaS metrics here. That's great. So you're at like 5,000 in MRR, and you need to get to 86,000 in MRR. If you start raising immediately, investors are going to look at that and be like, you're at 5,000. You're not eligible for a Series A. That's not going to work. So you've got to be able to hit those metrics before you can start raising. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get the traction with the investors that you need, which is what drives you to have less cash in the bank when you ultimately raise. But 6 months would be nice, but reality is that a lot of times it gets down much, much less than that before you close your round. Did your investor send you the total? Sorry, 1 second here. I'm getting a few different messages from different angles. Did your investor send you the total amount raised in one round all at once? Is it typical to tie cash funding to milestones? For angels, it happened along the way. So I raised on a safe for Comp. So that meant that every investor that was writing a $25,000 check got their paperwork when they got it, and the cash went into our bank account. So I raised over the course, in 25K to 100K increments over the course of a couple of years. So it was paid, as the money came in, we added it to the bank account, bought us a little bit more runway, pushed it out a little bit longer. When you're doing a priced round, so not doing it on a safe or a convertible note, then you're having that money come in one chunk. So that's when investors are buying equity in your company. And so that's going to all come in one big chunk. And a lot of times they don't tie the funding to milestones necessarily, because that's a little bit strange. You need the money to come in before it's their money to get them to those milestones, right? To help you get to that point. But it's, what do they expect to see? Like, what can they expect to see the measures of a success? If they give you $1 million, where are you going to go with that? What are you going to be able to do with that money? And where are you going to be able to to take the company? And does that get you to a point where you can raise the next check that you need to be able to raise, is what they're looking at. The ones that want to tie it to metrics now, that's where they're not going to write a check until you hit certain metrics. So a lot of times for a seed round, an investor wants to see somewhere between $8,000 and $10,000 in MRR for a SaaS business. That's, you know, a metric that's out there. Some will give you checks earlier. Some want to see 20K, but a lot of times it's somewhere between 8 and 10K. They won't write a check until you fit their investment profile. So that's where those metrics come into play. That's a great question though. All right, I've got a question from Becky here. With the big focus on data and its importance these days, what are your thoughts on having data specific positions in the startup budget? Are investors expecting to see these types of roles now? I'm curious what you mean by data specific. If this is like a data analyst or a data scientist, or is it an engineer that's focused on you know, building out kind of an AI ML model. I think for a lot of startups, you need to have the data and you need to be able to build something that can collect the data before you can start analyzing the data. So I don't see if it's an analyst or a data scientist, then that's where I see that later on, because if you bring on a data scientist too early, there's nothing for them to do their job on. You don't have the data collected. Whereas you can meet with a data scientist early on to figure out how you want to structure that data and can do that so that they can have something to work with down the road is what I typically see. All right, let's see here. All right, I think that's all the questions for the moment. I'm going to switch back to the model and we're going to keep going on that side. These are great questions though. All right, in the interest of time, I'm going to, because I know we've got a little over 10 minutes left, I want to make sure that we show through the model and how this works and give you a glimpse of the revenue side so you can see that. All right, we went through the team side. On the expense side, again, this can be very, very basic. This is not complicated here. I've got my COGS, I've got my marketing. You see there's no blue, it's all blue. I just typed in a number. I don't know what I'm going to need to spend every month on marketing in the future. We don't know that yet. And so it's typing in a number. You know you're going to need to spend something. What do you reasonably think you could spend? And do it at a very basic level, right? What you don't see in this model that a lot of more complicated models will have is if I give marketing $1,000 this month, how many leads are they going to generate? And then how many of those leads are going to close and turn into sales? When you are pre-revenue, you have no idea. And so you got to start somewhere. And then as you know that, you build out a more complicated model. But this is the easier version. Same thing with, you know, travel, putting in some numbers just so that you have a placeholder. So you're not forgetting or leaving anything out of your expenses, but taking that into account. You know, rent, the same thing. Mine is basically nothing now. Or utilities, you know, just putting in the things that you think you're going to have to spend in and just put in some numbers by year. It's very basic. This is not high level math. Then for the expenditures piece, this is where I pull it all together. So you can see the COGS. This is only the things that cost us money. So there's no revenue in this. The cost I break out by team. So management, sales and marketing, our sales and account management, marketing, engineering, product, G&A. So this is where you find, you know, payroll, taxes. If there was anybody on the, you know, office manager side, which we don't have, you can see here, the different types of things that would be included. So this is where you see there's not much blue when you're looking out here in the future, because this is all built off of formulas. So this is saying, if I look at the team tab, what is, you know, who do I have in management and what is that costing me on a monthly basis, and kind of running that out so you can have a sense for what you're spending money on. Down here, you're looking at the expense assumption tab and looking at the different years and pulling that out. So this is all, you'll see there's not much blue. If I scroll back into reality, you know, so this is, you know, earlier in 2020, this is where I will go in and I will hard code numbers. They're all in blue because they're a typed in number to where I can sanity check. All right, in July, I actually spent, you know, because of the way the months shook out, 7,400 and change on management compensation versus the 68. But the month before that, because of the way the months, you know, the payroll period shook out, it was a little bit less. So keeping things real, that's where you can change things in the future in the model, and it won't impact kind of going backwards because you've hard-coded numbers. I'm going to skip the pricing pieces for the bottom end because I'm going to shift over so you can see the revenue side and skip to this cash flow piece. So what you can see is that you've got the COGS and the expenses. Those are the parts that we've been spending time on. And I put a total for each and you run it out by month. That's going to show you how much money you're spending because this is done on a cash basis. So that means when the cash is spent, that's when it pops into this model. It's not an accounting model. It's not GAAP accounting. It's on a cash basis. So it's more of a cash flow projection. All right, how much are you spending? How much was in the bank account at the beginning? And then how much is going to be there at the end? And what that means is, you know, you take the prior month. How much cash did you have at the end of the prior month? That's your beginning cash. So this formula is literally just that. And then from there, subtracting out everything that kind of all those expenses, everything you spent on, and then you add in the amount of revenue you have, if you have anything, and that's your ending cash. That's your projection. So it's cash you had minus everything you spent and adding back the little bit that you brought in, and that's your cash piece. So that you can look at, all right, what is your monthly cash burn? And I've got operating cash burn here. That's assuming zero revenue. How much did you spend? So you can see here, we actually spent a lot more money, but we're starting to get revenue. So it's a different number. And then just running this out. When you start seeing negative numbers, that means there's in this bucket, that's when you see like, okay, we still have, oops, too far, cash out. We're out of money. We got no money at this point. So you can start playing with it like, okay, how many months of cash do I actually have with the people that I want to hire over a period of time, and how does that work? And then I keep focused on that. This blue line is investment, to where, you know, if you're like, okay, I raised 100,000, you put that in there. So it doesn't go on to your revenue side. It's not revenue, it's cash in the bank, but you can put it on your investment tab. So I spend a lot of time in this tab. I play with the number of hires, when I'm gonna hire them. I come look in here and say, all right, when am I gonna run out of money? And then I work backwards from that and be like, okay, that's too soon. Maybe we need to push a hire out, or we need to drive revenue up, or maybe we need to wait until revenue hits a certain number before we trigger that in. But starting with that. But that's, you know, the cash flow piece. I want to shift over for just a couple of minutes on the revenue side, because it's a less complicated model. Just to give you a sense of what that looks like as you start having revenue. That's the other side of your model. Again, layers of the onion. You'll see this only has 3 tabs. So I start with a pricing tab. For this, I made up some numbers. Mine is based on number of users. You put in kind of what that looks like for you, whether it's cost per user, or what the revenue per user, or if you've got channel pricing. But you build out a basic tab. Blue, you can touch it. So it's creating what that looks like. I have an assumptions tab from there that says, all right, how many of these things am I going to sell? So if I'm selling to this number of companies, how many companies I'm going to sell? Again, I'm making these numbers up. These are blue. So I'm guessing, how many do I reasonably think our team can close in this period of time, whether it's channel sales or direct sales, whatever relates to your business. And it's, you know, you're doing just a number of companies. So it's making some guesses, and then you refine as you know. And then you've got a roll-up tab that says, all right, if I can sell this many at this price, what does that look like? What does that look like for number of users? What does that look like for revenue? If you've got different types of revenue, breaking that out. And that gives you your type. This is all kind of future, aspirational. Where do you think this business can go on the revenue side? There are 0 costs accounted for here, because a lot of this is, I mean, it's all assumptions of how you could grow. This is not normal growth, 10,000 to 1 million to 14 million to 111. Investors would be lining up and, you know, smashing down your door to write a check if you could run that type of a model. But it's directionally, where do you think there's an opportunity here? Now, I know that was really fast on the revenue side, but again, don't overcomplicate it. Think about your pricing, and it's just your starting pricing, thinking about how much you want to sell and of what, and then just do basic math to see where it goes, because it's going to give you a sanity check. I like to start with these tabs and then have it roll up, because then you can see, all right, is my number way too big and just doesn't make sense in reality, or is it way too small and I need to think about either, is this viable, or is this something that we need to do differently? I'm going to pause there, double check for any last questions. Let's see here. The what is color coded? The blue, I'm guessing somebody who joined a little bit later, blue means it's hard coded, that we typed in a number, and it means you can type on over it. So it's not a formula. And so that's how we look at the color coding for that. I think that's all the questions. I know that was really fast and we went through a lot. Hopefully this has been helpful as you think through how to build some of this out, how to think about that cash flow. Again, the quick and dirty method. What are you spending on? How much cash is in the bank? Divide it. That's how many months of cash you have. So you don't have to go really, really crazy and deep on this to just get a sanity check for your business. But really appreciate everyone's time today. If there's any last questions, I'm keeping an eye on, let's see here, one just came in. Do your early investors want to see your cash flow model forecast? They want to know where their cash is going. I do the quick and dirty method for them. They know if they're writing $1 million, that is not going to last you 5 years or be your last check. So are you thinking about the right number of heads that you're going to add? Are you thinking about, the timing for them? That's what they want to see when they're looking at that. And then I got another question. Can you share some of these spreadsheet files as part of the talk? Yeah, let me pull out a little bit of data, just make sure there's nothing too sensitive, but I don't think there is. And I can certainly put that out there as well as the slides for folks too. And I'll have the Startup Boston folks who are amazing help me figure out how to share that. Let's see here. There's another question that came in. Did you build this out separately from software like QuickBooks? Yeah, QuickBooks is not going to build a model for you. QuickBooks is just accounting software. It's how you pay your bills. All of this, I always build in a spreadsheet. I have yet to use any actual accounting software to build out a really good model. But yeah, unfortunately, you got to do this separate. But thank you all for your time. I know we're bumping up, and I really appreciate everybody who joined this early in the morning, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your day and have a great rest of startup week.